Well. Good evening onto your screens. Fantastic to have you with us. And after hopefully also a new area, sunny Pentecost weekend, I hope that you are all in good shape, not sunburned, and relaxed, because we are going for well, you are probably in an area where you are in the darkness of the positive moods, but
the
or
darkness
at
of his
least
own
the
soul.
shades, or if there is more rain in your area. I was lucky.
The
because,
Aborigines here talk about 300 days of rain per annum.
well, some people in the good old London would say, well, we have a tower to de-ice the area, and we had a lot of umbrellas to fight against the rain. But on sunny weather, we are not the experts. Put it around. Weather has sometimes to do with growth, because one of the AIs I found I liked very much was Watson. Not for playing chess or Jeopardy, but for weather forecasts and the conjunctions in marketing and sales or organizations. Now we have the pleasure to have Martin Schneider with us. And Martin has some grown experience on each side of the table, as I announced it and promoted it. And Marshall gave me some other hints. So we have a fantastic topic to discuss, such as growth. The Chief Growth Officer in uncertain times, in, let's put it politely, times where a lot of surprises happen hourly. One should be prepared to have a sustainable growth idea and have somebody who is playing the role. Folks, I get this circus together and we drive in the same direction and we will make it, and our customers will be happy, you will be happy, and the organization, how greedy they may be or less greedy, will be happy as well. Now, Martin, that shows up that we have a bandwidth of topics.
Yeah.
And I'm very delighted that you are our guest today. In your new role with a company, you will tell us a bit about more during the next hour, and on the topics you will talk about, and to be written book, and that connections and good networking is the essence in critical times, as you know your boss Adam Needles for a long time. Now it's up to you. Tell us a bit about your background, please, for those which do not know you in depth.
Sure. I hope most of the audience. I've been on the show several times, right? So in different roles. But I come from that interesting mix where I've spent a lot of time as an industry analyst covering CRM related applications, analytics, e-commerce, things like that. But also, obviously, as a go-to-market leader for multiple vendors out there, specifically in the tech space and in the top of the stack, front office applications like Sugar CRM, Support Logic, Caspio, and others. And it's funny because now I'm coming back and I'm less an analyst about, let's call it, just the technology, and way more about thinking about go-to-market strategy and using the data that we've learned at Annuitas from 100 plus enterprise transformations on the go-to-market side, as well as my experience as a go-to-market leader and my technology analyst background, to bring a kind of new set of both syndicated and also custom research to our clients and beyond, to really tell a story of what is needed to kind of master go-to-market today to create growth engines, sustained, predictable, and obviously perpetual. We like to call it growth. And a lot of people aren't doing a great job with that for a lot of different reasons. And one of the things that we've been really focusing on is this idea of the office of the Chief Growth Officer, which may not be an individual, like I said, could be an office. and I'm about to publish a book around that that we will be presenting to the world. We can share the link if we have the ability to do that. People can pre-register. I'm just in the final publishing stages of that now. A little fit and finish, polish, all that, binding the actual book. Not really, it'll be digital, but that's really what we've been focusing on. Is really, how do we, given all these things you kind of half mentioned and hinted at, all this change, all this chaos, how do we start to create and make sense of clear shared growth plans for the entire organization, enterprise, whatever you want to call it? And there is some kind of frameworks and some things that you can do. And the initial kind of focus on my research is bringing a lot of that out and kind of giving that away.
So you've been responsible for tracking growth, and you've been responsible for causing it in your time.
Yeah.
Hopefully you've caused it.
Yeah, I think so. Well, it was, we were really, sometimes you're lucky and you're kind of coming into the go-to-market side of things. I was lucky enough to be an analyst covering companies like Salesforce when they were coming up, covering, all these kind of young startups who are now like very big companies, and then became, a marketer with, let's call them friends and friendlies, people like Dharmesh and Brian from HubSpot. And we were building, I was building, business blogs that were getting a following, my CRM Outsiders blog that I was doing when I was working with Sugar, and learning about inbound marketing and building out, nurtured free trial freemium, which we now even call product-led growth. It's got a whole different name, but we've been doing that for years and driving that as like the 40 to 60%, number one revenue driver for the companies that I've worked at, building those inbound and kind of low friction strategies. Yeah, we definitely grew a lot during those times. I think the challenges are a little different now, and things have gotten, more people have caught on to that. So it's kind of a little more needle stacks, but we were doing that early on. So I was kind of lucky to have come into it and help kind of shape some of that, as well as benefit from a lot of it too. So definitely driving growth. Ralph's got
I have a question. Such as being not the most knowledgeable guy, not stupid, but not knowledgeable in all areas, as I didn't know the Italian statistician genie. This is why I had so bad marks in statistics during my studies, and in math, I'm a disaster area, but I still can do my invoicing properly with help upstairs. I was wondering if you could give us a bit of a backgrounder, such as not what you played in former business lives as roles, but how you reconnected with Adam, and what does a chief growth officer do, and what is your role as head of research? Please.
Sure. So one of the things that's interesting is, I worked with Adam back at 451 Research. He was kind of running marketing there, and I was on the analyst side. And because I was kind of always running the marketing as Marketo was coming up, and Eloqua, again, really close with Mark Organ when he was building Eloqua, and we were always kind of talking because he was doing marketing for the company, and I was the marketing software analyst as that was coming up. So we always kind of shared a similar mindset around embracing people, process, technology, how we were going to promote the company. Where a lot of the analysts, I don't mean this in a bad way, they were like really just focused on like storage technology, and they didn't care about marketing, right? They were just, I want to be the best storage analyst I can be. And some of them were. Simon Robinson, who just left 451 after like 25 years, one of the early people, he was the best storage guy. Like he knew everything, right? And the same with a lot of the guys. There weren't a lot of like business minded. They were really tech minded. They were real tech enthusiasts. They were amazing. So Adam and I always got along, right? And we've kind of followed each other because he went to Silver Pop, and then I was at Sugar, and then this, we kind of, and then he started in its newest form about 10 years ago. And I always read what he did because we were always like, his stuff, people would be like, oh, that's really smart. And I was like, no, it's okay. It's logical, right? So when I left Support Logic, we actually just connected almost like immediately and started talking about, well, what can we do together? And then we started dreaming up some ideas. He said, look, I've got all this data, right? I've got all of these data, like all this really cool stuff and all these good stories. You've got the experience from multiple companies and being an analyst, like how do we put this together? So we kind of created this new spin-off. I don't want to call it a company, but more of like a division, Annuitas Research, which essentially, kind of is this idea of like taking all that we have, but also my relationships in the vendor community around the go-to-market vendors that I've either been partnering with, sometimes competing with, but also, but just knowing, right? And building that out to really kind of get to an interesting kind of like hybrid of like practitioner support, but also like vendor analysis and thought leadership, but also data-driven stuff and hopefully soon some benchmarks and KPIs. Like I said, I'm a little more than 4 months in, so we're really scratching the surface. But what we've really been focusing on first, like I said, is this idea of the chief growth officer. Because what is that, right? So
what is
like kind of what it isn't first, right? It's not a chief revenue officer. It's not a chief marketing officer. It's not a chief customer officer. Because what we've found in doing these enterprise transformations, and what I found in trying to go to market and be successful, understanding the full customer journey, right? You guys probably remember when Phil, what was his name? We used to do the at Sugar. I said him. He used to work for SaaS.
Phil Winters.
Yeah, Phil Winters. I don't know why I forgot his last name, but he and I would go around the world and we do these customer journey mappings for our customers. And they were always like enlightening and they were great, but no one ever did anything about it. Maybe like one little tweak. So what we're trying to figure out now is like, how do we actually operationalize this around the entire customer journey? Because no matter what anyone says, you go into anywhere, the metrics that people focus on in these siloed departments, CMOs, CROs, and there you go. And the did I write that? No, or was that?
No, that is Phil's book, my friend.
Because we wrote another one around the customer journey.
It
One,
must
so.
be
must be a wonderful feeling to not know whether or not you wrote a book.
You know how many? Yeah, like how many things like have gotten bound that I've had my name not on that I actually read. But what I'm saying is when you look at like a CMO, what do they care about? They care about leads and conversions.
Yeah.
Is that growth? Maybe, but how are you quantifying it actually around it? When you look at a CRO, what do they care about? They care about closed deals, right? Hitting quota, those types, and they're super important things. But is that a shared growth plan for the entire organization? And then when you look at a chief customer officer, there's a lot of different ways where I can say where the metrics go sideways, right? Because a lot of times, a lot of chief customer officers are like glorified service delivery people, where there's a revenue aspect, but it's like super project based. It's not strategic. It's tactical. It's just a follow on from when they signed the SaaS deal and this is the implementation. And all they're dealing with is like putting out fires, right? Or they're customer support focused and same thing. They're just putting out fires. It's not strategic. So you need a layer that isn't necessarily the CEO. It might even be the CEO, depending on the size and scope of your company and the personality there. But it's like, how do you get a shared growth plan that actually makes sense for the entire journey and kind of observes and actually enforces the engagement in a strategic way across all of those end-to-end customer journey points, and creates an engagement model that will be predictable to growth, right? Because, how many companies have I worked in where they say a board comes in, whether, whoever is the board and whoever's leading it and the majority, and it's like, we're going to be a rule of 40 company. We're going to have 20% growth and 20% profitability. Go. Right. And then the marketer says, well, I'm doing 115% of my lead conversion things. And the chief customer officer is like, all our customers are happy. And then the chief revenue officer or head of sales or whatever is like, yeah, we missed our number by like 40%. So what happened there?
Yeah,
right?
Let me throw a little wrench, Martin.
What's that?
Let me throw a little wrench, Martin.
Sure.
Because you said what happened. So what happened is the chief growth officer interfered and managed successfully to get growth at all cost. And all of a sudden, the chief revenue officer is quite unhappy.
But they didn't have a chief.
But that's what I'm saying. If you don't have that, and I think that's the idea. Is the reason why I'm putting out the handbook, we're calling chief growth officer handbook in this book, is really of how do you build this. We even have like a position description in it of what these people should be focusing on, because that's the idea. It's how many people say more leads, any leads. How many people say more cold calls. That will change metrics, but it doesn't incite predictable, scalable, perpetual growth, right? So when you do all these, we call them random acts of marketing, that growth at all costs is a version of that, right? And that's the whole thing is like, look, is it all hands on deck? Yes, but is it at all costs? Ideally, no, because that's tactical. That's short term. You wind up burning good potential relationships. There's all these things. So if the chief growth officer is doing their job,
didn't it?
yeah, and if their purview and their remit is the right thing and the right lens that we call it, a converged growth lens, right, where you're thinking of pre and post sale and actually keeping those things responsible in a shared plan, you would understand and say, well, let's analyze post sale and say, where are these opportunities? Where are we falling down with that? Because we know the chief customer officer is too busy putting out fires. How do I take data? How do I create a customer data value chain that tells me more about all this post-sale stuff? Because most of our customer data is focused on pre-sale, whether we believe it or not, right? CX is still either like experience with a product or like just early marketing conversion numbers, right? So we really need to like rethink that for that end-to-end, that customer data value chain that really does cover every pre and post sale arc, whatever you want to call it, right? So I would argue that what you're saying is that's typically when it's a CRO, not a CGO, right? The thing you're saying is like, because that's still thinking about revenue, thinking about opportunities converting, and growth at all costs, rather than again, customers for life, customer lifetime value, and knowing when to say no, not just when to say yes, those types of things. And growth officers need to, have a different type of view, because I feel like they're obviously a C-level, but a CMO might not report to them, but they're super like a superset over that, right? Because again, if you're focusing on the wrong metrics, or let's call it incomplete metrics, your KPIs are never going to meet where you want to be, because you're not. It's like it's the blind man and the elephant, right? And that's the and that's where the CGO concept kind of comes in. And look, we're still seeing like titles out there. I search LinkedIn and I do searches for chief growth officer, and I'm seeing too many like growth marketing. And look, these are important, but then I'm still seeing like in my activity feed like growth hacking. And I'm like, that's just another way of saying random acts of marketing, which aren't effective, right? They're short term. They're band-aids, right? They don't. They solve symptoms. They don't.
2015.
Yeah. And
growth hackers 2015.
Exactly. And but you still see that stuff, and and it needs to change. Like it needs to be more strategic, especially now, because when you're forced to make, or not forced, just randomly making major structural changes and layoffs and things like that, and trying to do more with less. Well, if that strategy is not in place and that engagement methodology for end to end isn't at least fundamentally there, then you're just totally.
What is then the key metrics of a chief growth officer, a CGO? Because when we are looking at the change in the marketplace, growth was measured in incremental revenue, probably still is.
Yeah.
So if you are now saying this is the key metrics of the chief growth officer, then we are back at growth at all cost.
No, it's different.
Revenue and profit doesn't matter then anymore.
No, but it's like, again, it's customer lifetime value. It's lift. I would use terms like lift rather than incremental revenue, right? Because again, incremental revenue, it's that typically has a kind of sales oriented of like, did sales go back and just go and sell them things they needed or didn't need, or things that, upsell, cross sell. These are important things. But the idea when you think of customer lifetime value and lift, and then you can start to create this idea of like, well, what is lift and especially now we're in a recurring revenue subscription economy, whatever you call it. It's like, what's lift in year one versus expected lift from between 2 and 3, 3 and 4, and so you're looking at lift against CLTV, right? And that's where it kind of becomes interesting, because you can start to analyze these things of like not just the total number, but then you break it up and you say, what is marketing's contribution to lift, not conversion rates, right? What is sales contribution to lift, not just opportunity closing, and then what is successes and support, right? These are two different ones, right? What is their contribution to lift? I'll let product off the hook for now, because then it gets a little too crazy. But like the idea is when you look at, because like you look at support, and one of the things I even learned at my last company is when you actually start to you get that customer data value chain, and you start to analyze customer behavior, activities, and get that true view of the customer, you start to realize that support can be a driver of growth and a driver of lift. Because when you realize, how do we structure this support relationship so that it's win-win, you actually can start to create some revenue. it's more logic. We found revenue opportunities for really big companies, like in the millions and millions of dollars inside their customers who weren't paying for premium support, but were either getting it, and shouldn't have been getting it, or needed it, right? So when you start to do that analysis on your own, or use the technology and tools that are readily available, you start to realize that there's these departments can be putting it in. So rather than creating this top-down arbitrary, rule of 40, or if we don't grow by what Gartner says the industry standard is for growth in our division, we're screwed. Well, no, actually make it bottoms up, and then create it strategic and make it shared, and check all along the way of the year or whatever your cycles are to do that, right? So so that's kind of what it means, right? The Chief Growth Office. I mean, it's definitely way different than a lot of people are approaching growth. I mean, we presented these concepts, Adam and I, at a keynote at the Ignite USA. It's like B2B marketing. Usually do this event in London. They're starting to do it in the US. And we were the closing keynote. And I'm always, you're always like, are people going to think this is stupid? Or people going to be like, yeah, of course, And everyone came up and they're like, the way you described the Chief Growth Officer and your converged growth concept, and how marketing and sales, these people need to align around this. It's like, it's crazy, like how much people were like receptive to it, and like, wow, that's like, I'd never seen it that way. It was almost alarmingly surprising in a positive way. And it's that kind of, so it was really interesting, how much that Chief Growth Office is absent, but really does need to be there. And I think more and more people are getting it, especially given everything that's happening. So it's an interesting time. Like I said, I'll be making the handbook available to any and all interested readers. And I think we might, I don't know if you guys can share links, but I think I said it to you.
You repeatedly said lift. Lift of what?
So lift of customer lifetime value, which is also revenue, right? Look, at the end of the day, are we talking about, is revenue and growth and lift, are these all the same thing? Yes and no, right? It's different ways of looking at it, right? Because it's about strategic growth, not a bunch of like random acts of just trying to get people to sign deals, right? And that's what, that happens way too much, right? And look, there's a lot of political reasons why this stuff continues to happen. Again, it's like, well, if we don't do this, the board's going to be angry, and if we don't do this, we're not going to get our next round of funding, or whatever it is, right? And I understand that, but great companies are building these more strategic and shared growth plans, and they're succeeding really well for it. We've got some really good clients. I don't know which ones I could actually put in by name, but some of them are in like B2C even, and they're trying to build more strategic engagement rather than a traditionally more, I would call it anonymous, but like transactional relationship, and things that you buy that you would never think you would think of a strategic customer lifetime value, and tracking that and managing that and building, lifetime value KPIs and lift analysis. It's amazing when they start to get it. And these are some of the first clients we've been working around this converged growth concept. We'll be doing a roadshow in the summer and fall, showing some of these clients, and it's going to be really cool, because these are really new approaches. People talked about sales and marketing alignment, and no one even got that right. So now we're talking about like pre and post sale alignment, and that really is, it's very different versus like, oh, well, we've mapped the customer journey, great, but now if you're not operationalizing around it, and we used to talk a lot about that, like at Sugar and stuff, we never really did anything, right? And the customers never really did anything. They'd find some really interesting things and maybe spot fix a couple things. Remember, we had a PostNord, which is like the FedEx of Scandinavia. They found out some pretty cool things that they could fix, but were they like truly, content focused engagement around growth and around what I would call demand experience? No, they like fixed the customer experience, right? So, which is great, good stuff, but it wasn't going to help them grow their business. It was going to help them not lose business because they were literally finding like pre and post sale gaps that were like wide, right? So you go to the next phase and you start to think of what is that demand experience, right? Because, you talk about CX a lot, and which is really around that, like, how are they using the product? How are they doing things? Are they happy? And that's a very like high level thing. But when you really try to be more specific with what I would call demand experience, which is really like, what is that engagement? What is that methodology around, like, who are the personas? Who are the channels? What's the content? What are their pain points? What do they need? And engaging that way so that you're actually like strategically and in an almost predictive way, getting the right people to like see the right things and trust you and see you as the person they want to do business with for life. Because how many marketing people think of like the decision maker is our persona with the influencer committee? 100% pre-sale, right? It doesn't have a lot of, there's no like post-sale like engagement. How many people have like really strong drips and nurturing, and it's omni-channel across like chat and email and social and all these things that actually focus on the non-decision, some of these people don't even have non-decision makers in their CRM. They don't even know who they are, right? So you thinking about it, it's like who uses the product, not who buys the product. Who thinks about, are we going to keep using this other than just the decision of the guy who signs, right? So there's a lot of interesting things there that we need to change. Go ahead, Rob.
It's not only the customer experience and the experience journey, it's a buyer journey. It is a flower bouquet of arrangements and things to watch for,
Yes.
which makes it so exciting and challenging on the other end for the CGO to follow up.
No, exactly. It's a really good point, because that's why, again, if it's the strategic layer, which, we're doing some work with people just really rethinking their organizational structure, not like in the reporting sense and who gets what and who gets paid what, but really like we think it from like process oriented around this demand experience in departments like marketing and sales and product marketing and, corporate comms and all this type of stuff, but customer success. But you think about it in this different way, because exactly to your point, there's data points, there's data sources, both inside and outside the company, both what I would call like generic and specific, that you can really put together and create what I've been calling that customer data value chain. And when you do that, like the great thing is now that we can handle more data and more types of data than ever. And that was our problem before. Like it started like, well, we can't even get the data, right? We don't even know how to put it together, right? Then we could kind of put it together, but there was too much of it. We couldn't process it. Now we could process it, but we couldn't really make sense of it. So now it was like, now we have AI to do all that, right? And that's what's really kind of cool, right? Is that you can do all these types of things without having to hire a bunch more people and without having to really disrupt your org structures. It's more like an overlay of thinking about it as like, yeah, these are the jobs you do. But then when we put them through the growth lens, well, what's the tweak, right? What should you be thinking about a little bit more? What's this, that, and the other thing? What do we take away, and then what do we put in here in this growth thing? Because we actually, you kind of, it's more evolutionary than revolutionary, right? So I think you're absolutely right, Ralph, and it's really interesting to put it that way. But I think but that's the kind of thing, is the org structures change a bit, but all that data is way more usable than it ever was. So you can actually start to push down those insights that the CGO office finds and say, hey, look, success, maybe do a little more of this, or focus on these guys, or do the, and this timing and these, and creating cadences for how the engagement works and the content, and put it all together. Marshall, I know
right.
you want to talk.
But so the growth lens, as you put it, would be more for optimization than for maximization. Looking back just a month or two, because I always look backwards, we had sudden layoffs of thousands of people, caused by, among other things, explosive, uncontrolled growth in these companies. We hired too many people, predicting growth based on old numbers that weren't going to hold up.
Exactly.
To what extent would a CGO be more responsible for sustainable growth, and how would they interact with the CEO for that?
Well, I think that's exactly it. That's why I look at this as definitely like a C-level. It's not a growth marketer who's under the CMO, right? This is a strategic member of staff, right? This is someone who is saying like, look, we don't need to hire this many people, because if we actually build this engagement model, automate this, create that, become a little bit more predictive, become the trusted advisor, do all this type of stuff, maximize CLTV. We don't need to throw people at the problem. Now, look, sometimes with growth comes, you need more people, right?
Yeah.
But being able as a CGO to look at it and say, is this a spike or is this a trend? And sometimes spikes can be 2 years long, like we saw, right? And that's an obvious thing. It's like, People who kept investing in the housing market in 2007 and 8.
Yeah, I was going to say
it's the same
bubble.
thing, right? It's look, it's a human element, right? Of people don't want bad things to happen, so they tend to invest and they tend to do a lot of other things.
Right, they
with
see
the idea that
something
only
good
things are
happening,
going to happen, right?
they want to
And
get
who
on
wins
it.
usually? The people who understand that bad things happen and hedge and do other stuff, right? So and CGO is kind of no different, right? Like you need to look at your, like I said, that's why it's that shared growth plan that comes from like a absolute like rational, real, and like both using history as well as where you see things going. And good technology can aid in that, right? Like modeling and all this other stuff. Because how many times, like I said, if you knew, and some of you probably do know, you actually talk and get deep in some of these, especially startups and other tech companies, their growth plans are almost sometimes completely arbitrary. They say we want to grow 30% this year. Well, where did you come up with that? And B, how are you connecting the dots between your revenue contributors? Like there's sometimes people say, look, we're gonna grow 20% because we expect to get like 16% out of this division alone, and then the rest is going to be gravy because we'll definitely hit it with the rest. That's insane. Do you know what I mean? And the problem is it usually works, and then people get patted on the back, but it's absolutely lazy and it's totally insane. Do you know what I mean? Because if you're not accounting for the growth, then there's so many bad, repercussions from that. Because like if you're in the division that people say it's just gravy, then you're like, well, if it's gravy, then am I going to get fired if I don't do my job well? Does anyone really care? Am I valued? Is the whole division that I work on and the product that we put out important and strategic and critical to the company? Doesn't sound like it if you have zero growth expectations from what we do. Do you know what I mean? So, and at CGO would actually say, no. This is like, we get revenue from this. Let's plan for it. Let's model it, and let's figure out what we expect and hold people to it and reward them when they do well and have some difficult conversations when they don't, right? So like that's the idea, and people aren't doing that at all, right? It's shocking how much that doesn't happen, right? The amount of like just arbitrary and just pick a number and shoot for it, and people lose their jobs over it is kind of ridiculous, right? And the CGO should hopefully change that.
And that is sorry, Mark.
No, it was just going to be a little comment that we talk about how kids don't understand that adults are often making it all up as they go along.
Exactly.
People who run businesses are often making it up as
We're all just human beings trying our best.
Yeah.
But that's why
it's not only fake news, but it is also the danger of the junk bonds. And those people which have created that shit are not put into custody, are not responsible, but they get a load of money like the devil is shitting on the same direction and the same target and the same table. Yeah. The more you create, the more money you get at that table where you create all that bullshit. And that is worrying me. And that is something what I really would appreciate, such as talking about sustainable growth, talking about solid growth, and not growth like cancer.
Yeah.
Because what I do see, not only in the new economy, but also in these arenas where we have had the last 2 years of the pandemic experience, money was cheap. Brain was partly absent. And they bought everything which was not up to the tree on 3. That's my impression to a bit.
Yeah.
And there I'm the bad cop. Trust me. Because this is non-empathetic. And this is what is worrying me on the long run, because I'm not the 3 months thinker. Like I'm invested in God knows where. And I'm not squeezing out the lemon to get some extra juice. But I would like to see more like the mid-market senses, like we had it in old tradition, in the old days from Germany after World War II, which I recall as Wirtschaftswunder, that we have been in a sense of creative people going for a target and taking other people with on that journey, and also their customers. Now back to you.
No, I think you bring up some interesting points, and I think sustainable growth. I think again, look, greed is always going to be a variable that is part something you have to think about, but it's also sometimes unpredictable, right? But I think we tend to focus on public markets. We tend to focus on big enterprise companies with concepts like these. And yes, when you look at the pandemic, you looked at like the winners. It was super like we focused on like the Zooms and the people like that just really did amazing. And they did amazing for like a lot of logical reasons, but also for some like capitalistic reasons of like having the capital to be ahead of everything, right? And to buy the message of like, they became, when you can verbify or nounify or whatever you want to call your brand name, you're winning, right? And Zoom did that amazingly, right? And I'm not trying to denigrate them, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, like that kind of growth is like crazy, right? So like when you think about it, sustainable growth, solid growth, if we focus on these things, and I don't have the power to change any of this, but like when you focus on that, it becomes interesting, because if you actually start to look at and start to do some analysis of like the mid-market, right? And you get outside of tech, right? You get outside of like weird, bubbly type stuff, like growth is pretty good if inflation wasn't what it was. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I absolutely see your point, and I wanted to throw in not only showing that cup, but my blueprint for something I honestly admire from the bottom of my heart is the way like Sridhar Vembu and his team are growing Zoho.
Oh, amazing.
That is something which is to my liking. And this is like my vision of social economic approach, where you have not the much of discrepancies. Like Thomas was inspiring me, and I had my learning moment with that Gini index, such as where it shows up that there are discrepancies in organizations, in environments, in societies, from the lowest income to the highest income.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like we used to talk about it like Japan had like the lowest Gini index of developed nations between like average worker and CEO pay, and obviously the United States is the worst, right? Yeah. And it's that kind of thing where you start to get you start to analyze that, and a company like Zoho gets that like pretty well. Thomas and I were and Marshall was there. We were in Austin together at their Zoholics event, and I'm learning more about the technology and like being like, oh, this is really cool stuff. But then you learn more about the company and you're like, wow, like they really do run an interesting, like, it's like they're kind of like taking what was Mark's term, compassionate capitalism, to like the next phase, right? I think they're doing it in a much more interesting way because of their operations are probably a little more like that. But I think that's an interesting, it's an interesting, analysis. But yeah, that like the Gini index and all that type of stuff. I mean, that will probably go away, right? Because I think, you reach tipping points, you reach the, the idea of like how many billions of dollars can certain people have, right? And that just has to like eventually start to go away. The powers that be are smart enough to stave off the pitchforks as much as they can, right? The torches and pitchforks, right? And I think you'll start to see more of that, right? Because I think the idea is, and even if it's like a little bit more lip service, but there is like actual because you look at AI, right? And it's like you can utilize this in one or two ways. You can say, yeah, we're going to automate everything and we're going to get rid of workers and we're going to be a really, really lean organization. And Wall Street, aren't you going to love that? And that may have some short-term benefit and may not. But if you also say, hey, we're going to utilize AI to give our employees the best experience, to be the most productive they can be and the happiest they can be, to create like work-life balance, because we're not changing their salary because we're running more efficiently and making more money, but they only work 4 days a week, right? Or whenever they want to, or wherever they want to. All these things that change across multiple industries, not just tech. Again, let's get out of our bubble. And the people who use that as a comms plan to say, look, we're going to have the happiest employees because AI isn't replacing them. it's supercharging them. We're making superhumans, right? And they're going to be able to work less, live more, have the same amount of money. And as we become more efficient, and as we use AI to finally fix our supply chain, inflation goes down. So they don't change their pay, but it's like they got a raise. They got a 6% raise. But you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. So, and I hope people handle it that way, because that's the way, you look at growth and you look at sustainable growth and you start to think of these things. And it's, again, look, there's a lot more macro issues like population and global, what are we doing and this and supply chain and all this kind of stuff. But from, the some industries that can take those types of notions I just described, they'll probably win over their employees. They'll win over potential customers, existing customers, create that stuff. So there it is. I think it's, little baby steps, I guess.
Getting a little away from global capitalism theory to something that is a bit more tangible. What we have seen, starting from the global part, what we have seen is a change away from a growth mentality to a profitability mentality. So assuming that, knowing that the figure of a chief growth officer is not exactly a 2023 thing, or not even a 2022. So this means that the role and objectives of this role have changed. So what was the impact of this change from massive growth to more profitability? What is the impact on this role?
Yeah, because I think what it is, it becomes, and this word gets thrown around a lot, it's been thrown around forever, but I feel like it's value, right? What is the value of the growth? And what do we, you know what I'm saying? So like you talk about that balance of growth and profitability, right? Well, what's the value of doing this from a growth perspective to the bottom line? And again, this is a really super strategic position. So it's not just like, let's do more campaigns, right? Because nothing changes, right? But if you actually look at what is the value generated, the customer lifetime value, right? And how do these things affect that all along the chain? That's where I think that's what we're talking about, which is different. Because again, it was like, how do we power growth? Turn on growth, right? And just do a bunch of stuff. And that's very like exergonic, right? Is that the thermodynamic term? Like you're putting out a lot of energy, you're not necessarily getting a lot of value back, right? It's that type of thing, right? It's like trying to use liquid oxygen to get out of the atmosphere, right? It's incredibly inefficient, right? So how do you build a more efficient growth engine, right? And that's the idea. Because how do you bring that bar of like, energy to get it to like value received? How do you match that, right? And that's the art and science coming together, where we used to have CMOs doing a lot of that, like trying to figure out the art and science of marketing, where it was like mostly art before. We're getting more on the science side. Growth has to become some of that too. And I think you need a strategic leader, or at least a committee, so to speak, with shared goals and a shared strategic understanding of that, and analyzing that, using data, using all the tools that we have at our at our availability now to go and do that. Because again, it goes from that growth at all costs, like I said, those random acts, which is usually the random acts drive that growth at all costs, to much more strategic, orchestrated, and idea. Look, and again, does orchestrated mean like everything's like a it's not a it's not a glockenspiel, it's but it's a little bit more structured, right? In the idea of how you're going to grow these accounts and engage with them, because especially in B2B, you kind of know the cycle, right? There's major milestones that you can plan for. And marketing usually forgets half of it, of the life cycle, or just doesn't care, hasn't been taxed with it, right? So if you take that growth officer and you say, marketing, you can still focus on leads, conversion, and content, maybe for this part of the cycle, but we'll be implementing it. We'll be doing all this stuff. We'll be working with your ops guys, and marketing operations takes on a broader path of the whole journey. This is the different thing. It's like that balance of value rather than like just growth or just profitability. Because when you're just profitable, you usually don't grow. Right, with your eyes on being lean, and you can. And if
organizations
you're buying it,
fix this without supporting environmental or, let's say, legislative framework.
Do you mean that in terms of like inside a company?
Politics are fighting against my positive thinking and not are supporting me, but regulate me in their political frameworks or the legislative frameworks, that I'm hindered as an organization to do the good. Yeah, that is what I question, such as if I have sustainable, looking for the environmental and still can grow, and politics says, oh no, faster growth, more tax income is my favorite, such as I don't care how many photovoltaic sun whatsoever you produce in China, as long as the rubbish, garbage, and poison is kept in China.
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying. Look, when
I don't.
we're using a loose term around sustainability here, and I think like growth and but I think that's an interest. I mean, it's an interesting analogy, right? Because it's like at the let's call it the local level, right? The company has to have the mindset to do growth in a way that does balance value and customer lifetime value rather than random acts and doing all those things, right? And at the macro, global, and political level, it's the same thing, right? We all need to figure out that, like, if we do this strategically and sustainably, we're all going to benefit, because that's the whole thing, is like certain political views are very short-sighted, and there's pressing needs, especially in other countries, not just the United States and not just EU, where people think, well, the short-term gain of my people in terms of either getting jobs and getting a little bit more money and lifting them like this much more out of poverty is a good thing, but it's short-sighted, right? Because it's not sustainable. And people move on to the next thing or whatever it is, or eventually they become even more crushed down as cogs in the wheel, right? So I think I kind of get what you're saying, Ralph, but that's the idea, right? So taking it all the way back to this like CGO concept is like, if you don't have the C-level mindset that you want to do this strategically, and you want to found and fund this office and this layer, you're not going to be successful, right? Because that means you're still thinking in a deregulated way, right? Let's keep this metaphor going, right? And you're doing those random acts which are haphazard, keyword on hazard, right? And it's not a good thing. So I think these are interesting analogies, because like even at the lowest level, like a single company is kind of an organism in that way, and then countries and global and how they set up, again, it's short-sightedness and greed screw it up a lot, right? And and the people that can get above that, think strategically, maybe even take some hits in the short term, will do well, right? And that happens, right? You start to, you can make even like really, really old analogies, like John Collins' book analogies, like Good to Great, when it's like, let's sell the mills, right? Because it doesn't make sense for us to be manufacturing this anymore, because we can't do it at scale and we can't do it economically. What was that, Kimberly Clark or whatever, right? So it's the whole idea, right? There's all these, there's these ideas where like if you get strategic and you can do it as broad and as wide and as scale as you can, the benefits are there. But the activation energy gets a little worse. It is possibly a little exergonic before it becomes endogonic, right?
As strategic.
Go ahead.
As strategic as you're putting this role,
yeah,
I'm wondering whether it is possible and useful to delegate it at all. Sounds like a genuine CEO job.
Yeah, that kind of ties into something I was going to ask.
Yeah.
We've covered the what and the why. What about the who?
So like I said,
who does this job?
In the book, I have a position description. There's a way, people can use it, they can tweak it, they can go do it. They can actually go find their people. It might be internal, right? It might be someone you bring up. Like I said, it might not be one person. It could be a committee, right? It could be that the CMO was also a part of the CGO committee, because it's Chief Growth Office, the CCO and the CEO and the CRO, right? That and possibly even the head of HR, because the internal employee experience is important to all this, right? I'm just saying, right? But if it's a person, I think it's someone who could be a CEO, has that strategic vision, but I think needs to be a little bit more operational, right? Because there is, again, when I think of it as breaking it down to DX versus CX, that demand experience, and understanding what it's like to create a perpetual end-to-end kind of growth, model through demand experience. This is a big deal, right? And it's and the whole idea is, That person does need to get down in the weeds a little bit, right? And again, look, some CEOs are more hands-on than others. Fine, so maybe it could be, but the idea is it's not just a CEO because they have way different things that they need to think about, and it's not just a chief revenue officer because their metrics are way different. CMOs metrics are way different. CCOs are just mired in firefighting and solving critical situations with their customers. It's really hard for them to be strategic. So it needs to be separate, needs to be elevated, needs to be taken absolutely seriously. And that remit, like I said, needs to almost be like, you need to almost redefine the hierarchies and the org chart as an overlay around demand experience. So it could be a different types of things,
Moving forward then, for the future of the hoped for CGO.
Yeah.
Sorry, having trouble with words again. Does there need to be an undergraduate level or graduate level course specifically about managing growth? Because I know a lot of people who have done MBAs, who have done marketing degrees, who have done other degrees in the business oeuvre, who still, they have not specifically learned about growth other than that it's a good thing and here are ways to achieve it.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I mean, you're giving me good semi-retirement ideas for but I think
That's
so.
Schneider.
Like at least this approach, right? Especially the end-to-end, because what most MBA programs were built before was like subscription economy, retention economy, X as a service economy, right? So they don't think of that whole tail end of the customer experience and journey at all, right? So especially if you're a marketing person in an MBA, like no one cared about that and they didn't have to, right? The model wasn't there. So when we're thinking about this stuff from like 5-15 years ago, so everything is shifting. So that's the whole idea is like, what happened first, right? And I'll use tech as an example, right? We went to SaaS, and there were a couple people out there. So what did that mean? That meant perpetual license was dead. We had to rethink how we engage from a sales perspective. Perpetual license is dead. Everything's recurring. So we had to rethink how we thought about things from a marketing perspective and the experience around that. And everything was delivered over the internet. So we needed to change all these types of engagement methodologies. But then we were like, now we have to figure out how we actually like charge for it, bill for it, think about all that kind of stuff. And then, we have to support our customers now. That's like, like in a different way, because if we don't support them well, they can just stop paying us instead of, they already paid us, right? So it was, that was different model. So support had to change. And then they started becoming more implementators because this stuff was supposed to be SaaS and easy and no software, but that was a lie, right? So everyone's doing this. So they have services and they have chief customer officers now. So all this stuff changes, but now we're putting it all together to think about, well, what is that end-to-end demand experience that goes across that? Because it used to just stop when the contract was signed, right? And that we need to think about it full cycle. So yeah, I think a lot of MBA courses need to be expanded because they're some of them are probably criminally ignoring the post-sale concept of especially around marketing and go-to-market type MBAs. So good question. Yeah.
I come up with them occasionally.
Yeah, I can say, Professor Schneider. It has a nice ring to it.
The moment we do not cut you off too often, you come up. Short joke about MBA programs. So I think they are vastly overrated anyways. I mean,
I don't have an MBA.
What does, no, same here. That's why I probably say that.
My master's
I mean, what does it stand for? Master of Business Administration, and then usually there's the extension in something.
Yeah.
Which is defeating the purpose, I guess. So
like I would say, are your admin strategic in your software? So.
Yeah, be more like the pointy-haired boss. You can manage anything.
No pointy hairs here. So I mean,
no
look at Martins and my haircut. Closely followed by yours.
Absolutely, this is all about absolute efficiency.
The one who gets closest to pointy hair is Ralph. He has the longest hair.
Yeah, but he just had his trimmed. Be nice to Ralph.
And I have a stable internet connection, so I'm not frozen and I'm not leaking. So that makes today, at least today, a little difference.
Well,
but
right now,
I don't question the usability of the MBA. And Brent, well.
Yeah.
There we have a statement.
You're welcome.
Did you do that in only 2 years? I thought it is a 3-year program. But well done.
Well, that man is a speed of light in his role model. He's marvelous. Just in the changing of the work-life balance topic you had a bit earlier, Martin,
Yeah.
I can only support this. As in my own family, the BCG consultant decided that this treadmill is too much for a clear, sensible human being. He sorted his senses and found other directions to put his energy in, and is working now for a very smart AI-focused Netherlands internationally approaching company, but he is focusing on projects in the Netherlands, even as a native German speaker. And that I found very interesting to see that these people had a different mindset, such as supporting their customer is their idea of servicing, delivering benefits, and have over the years a substantial solid growth. And this is, from my perspective, an admirable way, a way of growth I support, and where I do see the future. We are approaching in 4 minutes the hours, and as you quoted Professor Schneider, I guess for your famous last sentence, you will need a bit more jumping in. What is your recipe? What is your advice, aside of reading your book, how to follow that path of success in the direction of thinking not inside out, but outside in, and create that sustainable growth flow of these different aligned journeys to success?
For sure. I think one, it starts with like a true, honest, and possibly using a third party, a go-to-market assessment. Take your example of the Dutch AI company. It's like they might have learned, probably because they use AI, that keeping a customer with the minimal amount of effort, but doing it in a good way for 4 years was better than trying to get 3 customers that only lasted 1 year. I don't know, right? Yeah. But when you do that go-to-market analysis and you understand both, like, okay, what are the channels that we do? Who are the people that we go after? What is our engagement methodology for demand experience from pre-sale to post-sale? Is the handoff there? How responsible for growth are we holding success and support and those things? What is their contribution to lift? And doing that analysis in a very earnest way, and warts and all. Like, it's not about finding what you do well, it's more like finding what you don't do well, right? And then figuring out, well, what is that process? We use the term conversation track architecture, right? It's a very core thing that we do, right? And you think about it, right? Like, you're kind of having this conversation along these milestones along the customer journey. Well, where does your conversation track architecture for post-sale? Do you even have one? Is there a structure to that? And doing those assessments is just the first stage. And then you start to realize, well, who's responsible for these things? Is there anyone responsible? Is there someone who could be? Do we need to hire? Do we need to shift people around? And then so it becomes organizational. And then you start looking at the tech stack, and you say, so you do these kind of this assessment kind of goes up, and you look at your maturity curve. Like, well, how do we get to that next stage, right? Mm-hmm. You do the assessment, you find yourself along that maturity curve to get to that perpetual end-to-end orchestrated growth model, perpetual growth model. And there, I know Annuitas can help with that, but that's the only plug I'll do.
It's a good one and well-timed right at the end.
Yep. Right at the end, yeah.
Leave us thinking about them.
Means it's the perfect time for your famous last words before we get you offline or get all of us back into the green room.
Those weren't them.
What we now talked a lot about why it needs a
CGO,
Chief Growth Officer. We talked about who this probably is and what they are doing. Now, what personal traits do the holders of this role need?
I think it's innovative, it's strategic thinkers, big thinkers,
It's a really good beard.
It's it's that mix of strategic and like I wouldn't call it tactical, but like someone who is like a big leader, but also can get in and like and manage the processes. People who are data driven, but also understand that it's about the value chain, not just like little points, so they don't get stuck in the metric silos.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking like broader KPIs. There's a lot of different traits that I think people need to have. Read the book, and the position description will have a lot of that too. I don't have it memorized.
Nice. Well, that has been yet another entertaining and enlightening episode with Martin Schneider. Dude, thanks again for joining us. It's always a pleasure.
Thank
Big
you.
fun.
Always fun.
Big fun.
We wish you a lot of success in your role you have found with Annuitas, and have a lot of fun in getting people on that fantastic, positively and enthusiastic approach.
We're already having fun with it, and just hope to keep it going.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Thanks,
And
everyone.
meet you soon again.
Absolutely.
in real life, or with a camera in between, or actually two
A little bit of
cameras in
both. Who
between.
knows?
So, yep.
Either way.
And, yeah. Thanks for the audience as well. A little sneak peek into next week. We will have a customer. We'll talk to a real enterprise software customer and what they are doing and why and how and the like. So this will be quite exciting too. So
Wait.
thanks to everybody.